He shook their hands. He laughed at their jokes. He played games with them, ruffled their hair, and gave them the warm, safe, America loves you treatment that only a late-night throne can provide. But some of the guests who sat across from Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show were hiding something that no camera caught. These are the 9 guests from Fallon's show who were actually evil. Number 9. R. Kelly, the performance nobody should have aired. On November 19, 2015, R. Kelly appeared on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon and performed a medley of his songs for a live studio audience. The broadcast was part of a Season 6 episode that also featured Rachel Weisz and director Spike Lee as interview guests. For most of the audience watching that night, it was a routine late-night musical performance. R. Kelly was still, at that point, a commercially active recording artist with an enormous back catalog and a significant fan base. What was also true in November 2015 is that the allegations against R. Kelly were not new. They had been circulating for years, in some cases, for more than a decade. The musician, born Robert Sylvester Kelly in 1967 on Chicago's South Side, had been charged with child endangerment back in 2002 following the emergence of a videotape. That case went to trial in 2008 and ended in an acquittal. But the verdict had done little to quiet the ongoing accounts from women and young girls who alleged he had subjected them to controlling, abusive, and illegal behavior. Village Voice reporter Jim DeRogatis had been covering the story since 2000. By 2015, he had spoken with dozens of individuals who described patterns of behavior that extended across decades. The R&B divas and surviving R. Kelly documentary movement was still years away. The multi-part Lifetime documentary would not air until January 2019. But the allegations were on record, widely documented, and available to anyone who looked. Fallon's team booked him anyway. The performance aired without incident. The studio audience applauded. What came after is part of legal history. In September 2021, following a federal trial in Brooklyn, R. Kelly was found guilty on 9 counts of racketeering and sex trafficking. The trial produced testimony from multiple survivors describing the systematic manipulation, coercive control, and physical harm they had experienced. In February 2023, he was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Additional guilty verdicts in Illinois federal court followed. He is currently serving a combined sentence of multiple decades and will not be eligible for release for many years. The 2015 Tonight Show booking does not bear criminal responsibility for any of that. But it does represent the entertainment industry's willingness to look away, to invite someone to a mainstream platform without asking the questions that a decade of reporting had already placed on the table. R. Kelly was welcomed and applauded in the year that those questions were still being systematically ignored. And if R. Kelly's case involves an industry that had years of documentation in front of it and kept looking elsewhere, the next entry involves a man who was, at the time of his Tonight Show appearances, perhaps the most respected comedian in the United States. Number 8. Bill Cosby, the legend who was already a predator. Bill Cosby appeared on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon multiple times in the show's early run, including a memorable segment from 2014 in which Cosby walked out confused, riffed freely with the audience, gave Fallon a piggyback ride, and did a tightrope walk with the host on his back. A second appearance followed, in which Cosby critiqued Fallon's impression of him. The segments were among the warmer, more nostalgic moments of the show's first season, an elder comedian passing something to a younger one, a living piece of television history paying tribute to the space where he had once been king. William Henry Cosby Jr. was born in Philadelphia in 1937 and had built one of the longest and most beloved careers in American comedy. His stand-up albums in the 1960s and 1970s were among the best-selling comedy recordings in history. His 1984 NBC sitcom The Cosby Show had rescued the network's primetime lineup and ran for 8 seasons. He had been a philanthropist, a cultural figure, and for decades, a moral authority on American family life. What was also true in 2014 is that allegations about Cosby had been circulating for years before Fallon's show ever welcomed him. Andrea Constand had settled a civil lawsuit against Cosby in 2006 over an alleged incident in 2004. Other women had spoken on the record in that case. The details were available in public court records. The moment that finally broke the dam came in October 2014, a few months after Cosby's first Tonight Show appearance, when comedian Hannibal Buress delivered a set in Philadelphia that included a pointed, direct challenge to the moral authority Cosby had constructed so carefully over so many decades. Buress called him out by name and in plain language, noting the contradiction between the public persona and the allegations that had been on the record for years. The set was filmed on a phone in the audience, uploaded online, and shared millions of times. What had been available in the public record for years suddenly became a national conversation almost overnight. By the end of 2014, more than 60 women had publicly accused Bill Cosby of drugging and assaulting them. The pattern described across dozens of testimonies was remarkably consistent. Drinks offered, a woman rendered unable to resist or remember clearly, and then an assault. Some of the incidents described were alleged to date back to the 1960s. Some accusers were very young when the events they described occurred. The women ranged in age, profession, and background, and their accounts came from different decades and different cities, which made the consistency across them all the more striking to those who reviewed them. In June 2017, Cosby was charged in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, with 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault related to the Constand incident. His first trial ended in a hung jury. His second trial, in 2018, resulted in a guilty verdict on all 3 counts. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison. Cosby served nearly 3 years before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction in June 2021 on the grounds that a previous agreement not to prosecute him had been violated when his civil deposition was used in the criminal case. He was released from prison. The legal question of his conviction was resolved on a procedural technicality. The weight of testimony from more than 60 women who made their accounts public was not addressed by that ruling. He was welcomed as a beloved comedy legend on The Tonight Show in the spring of 2014. 8 years later, a different picture had been drawn, one for which the legal record and the testimony of dozens of women provided the strokes. Coming next is a man who spent years positioning himself as exactly the kind of executive the entertainment industry needed, before the industry discovered what that positioning had been concealing. Number 7. Harvey Weinstein, the most powerful man in Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein did not sit across from Jimmy Fallon as a guest in the traditional sense. He was a film producer, not an actor or musician, and his appearances on the late-night circuit were limited. But his presence was everywhere on the show, embedded in the very architecture of Hollywood access. The films he produced, the actors and directors he championed, and the cultural infrastructure he controlled shaped what ended up on The Tonight Show's couch for decades. The Weinstein Company distributed films that Fallon promoted, and Weinstein was a fixture at the kinds of events and parties where the entertainment industry's social capital was spent. Harvey Weinstein was born in 1952 in Queens, New York, and co-founded Miramax Films with his brother Bob in 1979. The company achieved remarkable critical success, producing and distributing films that won dozens of Academy Awards, including Shakespeare in Love in 1999 and Chicago in 2002. He was seen as a tastemaker, a kingmaker, and a bully. The last quality was widely acknowledged and even celebrated in certain corners of the industry. His Oscar campaigns were aggressive, his deals were ruthless, and his power was absolute enough that people spoke of it in the present tense at all times. What was not widely acknowledged publicly, though it was known to far more people in the industry than have admitted, was the pattern of behavior that reporters Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey documented in their landmark New York Times investigation published on October 5, 2017. The investigation, followed shortly by Ronan Farrow's reporting in The New Yorker, described decades of sexual misconduct, meetings that became ambushes, career leverage used as coercion, and a vast apparatus of non-disclosure agreements and paid-off fixers that had kept the story out of public view for 30 years. More than 80 women ultimately came forward publicly. The accounts spanned from the 1980s through the 2010s. Among those who spoke were Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, Ashley Judd, and Uma Thurman. Weinstein was fired from the company that bore his name 5 days after the Times article published. He was arrested in May 2018. His first trial in New York ended in a conviction in February 2020 on 1 count of criminal sexual assault in the first degree and 1 count of third-degree assault. He was sentenced to 23 years. A California conviction followed in 2023. In April 2024, the New York Court of Appeals overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial, citing issues with jury selection and the admission of prior bad acts testimony. A third New York trial was subsequently scheduled. In October 2011, when Fallon's Tonight Show monologue addressed the Weinstein scandal's breaking news, he made a brief, understated joke. A man who had shaped so much of what had been promoted and celebrated on late-night television for decades barely warranted a sentence in response. But if Weinstein's power was built over decades, the next figure on this list built his power over a few explosive years and wore it like a kind of armor. Number 6. Sean Combs, the host of the world's most dangerous parties. Sean Combs appeared on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon on multiple occasions and was referenced repeatedly in Fallon's monologues and interviews over the years. The two men had a history that predated The Tonight Show. At the 2002 MTV Video Music Awards, while Fallon was hosting the ceremony, Combs charged across the stage and grabbed Fallon in a way that clearly startled him and resulted in a moment of awkwardness on live television. In a later Tonight Show interview, Combs described how he had once sent Fallon a self-destructing party invitation, and Fallon described attending one of Combs's legendary gatherings as among the best parties he had ever attended. Sean Combs, born on November 4, 1969, in New York City, built one of the most recognizable brands in American entertainment. As Puff Daddy, then Puffy, then P. Diddy, then Diddy, his names changed, but his dominance did not. He founded Bad Boy Records in 1993, launching the careers of the notorious B.I.G., Lil' Kim, and Mace. His production and label work helped define the sound of 1990s hip-hop and R&B. He diversified into fashion, spirits, media, and television. By any measure of commercial entertainment, he was one of the most successful figures of his generation. He was also, according to federal investigators who raided his homes in March 2024, running a criminal enterprise of extraordinary scope. Federal agents executed simultaneous searches of his properties in Los Angeles and Miami. What they found included extensive physical evidence, thousands of bottles of baby oil, zip ties, lubricant, and multiple firearms, along with digital material that prosecutors described as documenting a long-running pattern of coercion and abuse. In September 2024, Combs was arrested and charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Federal prosecutors described a pattern of activity spanning years in which Combs allegedly used his vast wealth, industry connections, and network of employees and associates to coerce, manipulate, and control individuals, including by orchestrating events at which people were allegedly unable to exercise free consent. The criminal complaint described these events in clinical terms, but the underlying behavior alleged was severe. In October 2025, Combs pleaded guilty to 2 counts related to transportation for criminal purposes and was sentenced to 50 months in federal prison, approximately 4 years and 2 months. A $500,000 fine was also imposed. The terms of his plea agreement included the forfeiture of extensive digital evidence. A civil lawsuit filed by his former partner Cassie Ventura, which had been settled within 24 hours of becoming public in 2023, had already placed the general nature of the allegations in the public record well before the federal indictment. The parties that Fallon had described attending as joyful, crowded celebrations now read as something altogether different in light of the federal record. The self-destructing invitations, the carefully managed guest lists, the controlled environments, features that had seemed like eccentric expressions of a famous entertainer's love of exclusivity, fit a pattern that prosecutors would later describe in very different terms. Next on this list is a figure who never sat in Fallon's guest chair, but whose presence defined what that chair represented. A man whose conduct toward vulnerable people was documented over decades before the first conviction came. Number 5. Kevin Spacey, the awards season regular. Kevin Spacey appeared on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon multiple times over the show's first several years. He was there in May 2014 performing an a cappella version of Jason Derulo's Talk Dirty with Fallon and the Ragtime Gals. He was back in August 2015 for an interview promoting House of Cards. He returned again in February 2016, coinciding with the premiere of a new House of Cards season. He was funny, generous with his impressions, and the kind of guest who visibly enjoyed the format, matching energy with Fallon's playful style while also projecting the gravitas of a two-time Academy Award winner. Kevin Spacey Fowler was born on July 26, 1959, in South Orange, New Jersey. He trained as an actor at Juilliard and built a career on stage and screen over 4 decades. His supporting Oscar for The Usual Suspects in 1996 and his leading Oscar for American Beauty in 2000 cemented his place among the most recognized performers in American film. His role as Frank Underwood in Netflix's House of Cards, which premiered in 2013, brought him a new wave of critical attention and a generation of viewers who had not followed his earlier career. On October 29, 2017, just weeks after the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and in the midst of the broader reckoning with abuse in the entertainment industry, actor Anthony Rapp came forward publicly and stated that Spacey had made an unwanted sexual advance toward him at a party in 1986, when Rapp was 14 years old and Spacey was 26. Spacey, in his public response, chose to come out as gay while simultaneously claiming not to remember the incident. The combination, using a disclosure of sexual orientation as a partial deflection from a statement by a 14-year-old, was widely condemned. In the weeks that followed, more than 20 additional individuals came forward with accounts of similar or more serious behavior. Several were men who had worked on or around House of Cards productions. Some described more severe incidents. Netflix suspended and then terminated Spacey's involvement in House of Cards. His completed film, All the Money in the World, had its release delayed, while director Ridley Scott recast the role with Christopher Plummer and reshot all of Spacey's scenes in just 9 days. Multiple productions were abandoned, recut, or delayed because of his removal. In the United States, Spacey faced charges in Massachusetts related to Rapp's account, but the case was dropped when Rapp declined to pursue civil litigation. In the United Kingdom, where Spacey had served as artistic director of the Old Vic Theatre from 2004 to 2015, he was charged with 12 counts of indecent assault and sexual assault relating to 4 men. In July 2023, after a 3-week trial at Southwark Crown Court in London, Spacey was acquitted on all counts. His legal exposure in the United States also did not result in convictions. The acquittals did not resolve the accounts of the individuals who had come forward, or the question of what his decade at the Old Vic had meant for the people around him. He was welcomed on Fallon's show as a celebrated artist. The industry's full reckoning with his conduct came later, and on both sides of an ocean. If Spacey's case involves the question of celebrity and credibility, the next entry involves a man whose public image was built specifically around being trustworthy, and who used that image as a tool. Number 4. The Donald Trump hair ruffle, the moment Fallon still regrets. On September 15, 2016, Donald Trump appeared on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon and sat across from the host in what became one of the most talked-about moments in the show's history. Trump was the Republican presidential nominee at the time, approximately 2 months before the November election. At one point in the interview, Fallon asked Trump's permission to mess up his hair, the famously mysterious hair that had been the subject of public speculation for years. Trump leaned forward, and Fallon tousled it, laughing along with the audience. The criticism was immediate and severe. Trump had already made deeply divisive statements during his campaign about immigrants, about women, about journalists, about entire categories of people. And critics argued that Fallon's playful interaction treated him as a harmless entertainment figure rather than a politician whose rhetoric was causing real harm to real people. The argument was not that Fallon had broken a law. It was that he had used the specific currency of his platform, warmth, normalization, laughter, to make a figure easier for a mass audience to accept. Fallon acknowledged this later. In a 2017 New York Times profile, he described himself as devastated by the reaction and admitted that he should have addressed the controversy on air when it first broke. On a 2018 Hollywood Reporter podcast, he became emotional while discussing it, saying he had not done it to normalize Trump or to endorse his political positions, and that he made a mistake and was sorry. He said, looking back, he would have done it differently. Trump himself added a layer of complexity to the aftermath. After Fallon expressed regret in 2018, Trump attacked him on Twitter, calling him weak and telling him to be a man for apologizing. The exchange captured something essential about the encounter. A moment of television levity had produced years of ongoing consequences. For Fallon's reputation, for his show's ratings, and for public discussions about what the responsibility of a platform with millions of viewers actually requires. The September 2016 episode was not the only time Trump had been on Fallon's show. He had also appeared in September 2015, as his campaign was building steam and before the full weight of his rhetoric had fully registered in public discourse. At that earlier appearance, Trump was treated with the same easy warmth. Questions about ratings, jokes about his hair, a general tone of celebrity interview rather than political accountability. The 2015 appearance received far less attention in retrospect than the 2016 one, but it established the pattern. Trump as entertainment figure, not political subject. By the time the September 2016 taping occurred, the campaign had already produced months of statements that critics described as harmful and dehumanizing. Toward immigrants, toward women, toward journalists, toward entire populations. The idea that this context should not change how a major broadcast platform handled an interview with the individual at the center of it was, for many viewers, no longer defensible. The hair ruffle became a symbol of something they felt had gone wrong before that moment, and which that moment crystallized. Both appearances became touchstones in the larger debate about how late-night television chose to handle, or chose not to handle, political power in the years before and after that November. Fallon's Tonight Show ratings dropped significantly in the aftermath of the 2016 controversy and never fully recovered their earlier dominance. The decision to treat Trump as a fun guest rather than a scrutinized public figure cost Fallon something professionally, and he has acknowledged it. The damage to the people who were affected by the policies and rhetoric of the Trump era is of a different order entirely. Next on this list is someone whose crimes were not political but deeply personal, a predator whose access to victims was facilitated in part by the kind of celebrity visibility that a Tonight Show appearance provides. Number 3. Harvey Weinstein's shadow, the culture that made it possible. The Tonight Show has always been a mirror of the entertainment industry, and the industry that Fallon inherited in 2014 carried within it a culture of silence around powerful men. That culture had been built over decades, and it reached well beyond individual cases. When the Weinstein story broke in October 2017, what struck many observers was not only the scale of what Weinstein had done, but the scale of what people around him had known and not said. His behavior had been an open secret in certain circles. His ability to operate required not just his own actions, but the acquiescence of an apparatus. Agents, assistants, fixers, lawyers, executives, and journalists who knew, or half knew, or heard, and found ways not to address it. This is the context in which The Tonight Show operated. It is the context in which every major platform in entertainment operated. Guests were booked because they were powerful, bankable, or culturally relevant. Due diligence on what those powerful people were doing outside the studio was not part of the process, and in some cases, being ignorant of it was a form of professional protection. What Fallon's show represents, as a record of this era, is not unique malice. It is a faithful record of what Hollywood decided to celebrate and what it decided to overlook. Every warm interview, every game played, every laugh shared with a guest who was later revealed as a predator is a document of that decision. The show did not create the problem, but it participated in the culture that allowed it to persist. The next case on this list is more recent, a figure whose legal status was already established before Fallon welcomed him, which is what makes the booking so striking. Number 2. Conor McGregor, the guest who had already been found liable. In June 2026, Jimmy Fallon welcomed Conor McGregor onto The Tonight Show to promote his upcoming return to the UFC octagon at UFC 329 on July 11th, where McGregor would fight Max Holloway. The interview was warm and light. Fallon and McGregor talked about fighting and legacy. They reminisced about going to a bar together in the past. McGregor reflected on the discipline and focus required to compete again after years away from the sport. What was not discussed is what made the booking instantly controversial. On November 22, 2024, a civil jury in Dublin, Ireland had found McGregor liable for the sexual assault of a woman named Nikita Hand at a hotel party in Dublin in 2018. McGregor was ordered to pay Hand €250,000 in damages. He denied the assault. 2 subsequent appeals of the verdict were denied. Criminal charges were not brought. Prosecutors cited the standard of proof required for a criminal conviction and determined that a conviction was unlikely given the available evidence. The civil verdict, however, was final and had survived appeal. A paramedic who examined Hand at a hospital on the night of the alleged incident testified during the trial that they had never previously encountered a patient with injuries of that severity and described the extent of the physical harm in graphic terms. The medical testimony was part of the trial record and was reported by outlets in Ireland and internationally. The backlash to McGregor's Tonight Show appearance was significant and immediate. Actress Christina Ricci, known for roles in The Addams Family and the series Yellow Jackets, shared a public statement on Instagram describing McGregor in the sharpest possible terms and demanding an explanation from Fallon for why someone with a finalized civil verdict for a violent offense was being given a mainstream entertainment platform. Her statement was widely shared. Viewers responded in large numbers across Fallon's social media channels, expressing their objection. Irish fans in particular noted the contrast between McGregor's reception in the United States and his standing in Ireland, where, following the trial verdict, he had largely been shunned by mainstream Irish public and media culture. Comments on unrelated Fallon posts were flooded with references to the McGregor interview for weeks after the broadcast. Fallon did not publicly respond. NBC did not release a statement. McGregor's appearance remained in the archive. What the McGregor booking demonstrated, perhaps more clearly than any other case on this list, is that the incentives operating in late-night television have not fundamentally changed. A famous name with a promotional need, a comeback fight, a product launch, a new platform, can still clear the booking process without the most relevant question being asked. The Weinstein story, the Cosby story, the Kelly story, the Combs story, none of them appear to have altered the fundamental calculus. The final entry on this list is also the most recent, and in some ways, the most instructive about how these patterns repeat. Number 1, the larger pattern, what a decade on The Tonight Show reveals. Jimmy Fallon took over The Tonight Show in February 2014. In the years since, the show has aired more than 2,000 episodes. The guests who passed through Studio 6B include a significant portion of everyone who has been at the center of the entertainment industry's most serious reckonings with harm. R. Kelly performed in 2015. He is now serving 30 years in federal prison. Bill Cosby gave Fallon a piggyback ride in 2014. More than 60 women accused him of assault. Kevin Spacey performed a cappella in 2014, did interviews through 2016, and was accused by more than 20 people of serious misconduct. He was acquitted at trial in London. Sean Combs described his legendary parties on the show and was later sentenced to more than 4 years in federal prison following a federal guilty plea on sex trafficking-related charges. Donald Trump had his hair ruffled in 2016, and Fallon later called it a mistake. Harvey Weinstein's films and stars populated The Tonight Show for years before his 2017 exposure and ultimate criminal convictions. Conor McGregor appeared with a smile and a promotion in 2026, 1.5 years after being found civilly liable for a violent assault. None of this makes Jimmy Fallon a villain. By most accounts, he is a complicated, commercially minded entertainer who has spent his career avoiding controversy rather than confronting it. His desire to be liked, which he has spoken about explicitly in multiple interviews, is arguably the show's defining characteristic, and that characteristic is part of why these bookings kept happening. The Tonight Show is not unusual in this respect. It is representative. Late-night television in the United States has always been built around the premise that the guest is to be celebrated, promoted, and made comfortable. The host is a facilitator, not an interrogator. The format itself is designed to make powerful people look appealing. What the list above represents is the cost of that design, not to the show and not to Jimmy Fallon,